Pope Francis just died. Why? Now, on the surface, people would think that, well, he was 88. He was very old. He was in old age. And his health was deteriorating. And that could just be because of age too. But that's what people would see on the surface. Was there something more going on behind the surface? And this is the spiritual side of things that most people are not aware of. And they need to be aware of it now. His health deteriorated to the point that he had to be admitted into the hospital recently. Why? Was it just old age? Or was there more going on behind the scenes that nobody could see and nobody knew about other than me? And what was going on behind the scenes? That he and his Catholic Church coven or Vatican coven were spiritually attacking me and were trying to sacrifice me to the devil, Baphomet, because that's who Pope Francis worshipped, the devil, not God. He was not of God. He was never holy. So, they called him Holy Father, and he was never holy. He worshipped the devil Baphomet specifically. And so he was spiritually attacking me and was trying to sacrifice me to this devil Baphomet for over 2 years now. And, by the time he died. And all of that sacrificial magic and death magic that him and his coven were doing on me for 2 years, over 2 years, it all backfired on Pope Francis. It was backfired on Pope Francis by God. All that sacrificial magic and death magic that he was having done on me through his coven, all of that sacrificial magic and death magic backfired on Pope Francis. And God did that on my behalf. And Pope Francis ended up in the hospital because of that backfire. And at the time, God told me that he will not come out of the hospital alive this time, because it was his time to go, because of what he was doing to me, and that it's Judgment Day for him. And then what happened? I see that he comes out of the hospital alive. And then I was asking God, hang on, you told me that he will not come out of the hospital alive this time because his time is up, because of what he's been doing to me, because of him and his coven trying to kill me, trying to sacrifice me to the devil, Baphomet. So he will not come out alive this time. So then why did he come out alive, God? That's what I asked God. after Pope Francis came out of the hospital alive, when I was told he wouldn't come out alive of the hospital this time because of what he was doing to me, because how he was trying to kill me and sacrifice me to the devil, Baphomet. But I see him coming out of the hospital alive, and I'm like, hang on, God, you told me he won't come out alive of the hospital this time. So how come he came out alive? And I didn't get the answer to that immediately. I had to wait. And then what happened? Now, when did Pope Francis came out of the hospital? Pope Francis was discharged from the hospital on March 23rd, 2025, after a 38-day stay for pneumonia. He returned to his residence at Casa Santa Marta in the Vatican to continue his recovery. Pope Francis's 5-week hospital treatment for double pneumonia, and he returned to the Vatican on March 23rd, 2025 for 2 months of rest to allow a full recovery. Right, so he came out of the hospital, or he was discharged from the hospital on March 23rd, 2025, and then after a few weeks, he died on 21st of April, 2025, a few days ago. So, why? What happened? So, 23rd of March to 21st of April, 2025. From 23rd of March to 21st of April, that's nearly a month. So, what happened in these few weeks? Pope Francis and his coven will not stop spiritually attacking me and will not stop trying to sacrifice me to the devil, Baphomet, even after Pope Francis came out of the hospital alive. Why did he even come out of the hospital alive? I was enlightened about this right after Pope Francis died a few days ago. Because I was asking God, hey, God, you were telling me something and then that something didn't happen. Why? And as I said, I did not get a response immediately. Or I did not get an answer to that immediately from God. But, you know, after a few weeks have passed, and then I see the news of Pope Francis finally dying in the Vatican, not in the hospital, but in the Vatican, after he was discharged from the hospital. And after a few weeks of him being discharged from the hospital and back in the Vatican, he dies. Now, I was getting signs about, you know, oh, I'm about to see a funeral. A few days before Pope Francis died, I was getting this sign from God that I'm about to see a funeral. And of course, Pope Francis's funeral just happened in the Vatican yesterday. So that was the sign God was giving me, and that was the funeral I was about to see. But also, after I saw this news that Pope Francis has died. And I've shared that in a previous video here as well. Then my answer came regarding why did he come out of the hospital alive when I was told that he wouldn't? Not this time. And then I got the answer from God. And I was told that he came out of the hospital alive because he was asking God for grace. And God showed him grace. And God showed him mercy. And that's why he came out of the hospital alive. And I was like, I see. And then, a few weeks go by, and I am still feeling under spiritual attack, and I am still getting the message from God, from the Arcturians, and from my higher self and my spirit protection team that Pope Francis and his coven is still spiritually attacking me and is still trying to sacrifice me to the devil Baphomet so he could live longer. And well, since he will not stop trying to kill me and sacrifice me to the devil, even after God showed him grace and mercy and let him come out of the hospital alive, he came out of the hospital alive, and him and his coven were still spiritually attacking me and doing sacrificial magic on me, and were still trying to sacrifice me to the devil Baphomet. And so God said, okay, enough. And that's where Anubis comes in. Because God was like, okay, well, you asked me for grace. It was your time to go because of what he was doing to me and how he was trying to kill me and sacrifice me to the devil Baphomet in this lifetime again. Because this is going back to, past lives. In particular, one specific past life where I was incarnated as Joan of Arc. Because I am the reincarnation of Joan of Arc for Christians. So this is going back to that lifetime, and then he was trying to kill me again and sacrifice me to the devil Baphomet again this lifetime too. And at the end, he asked for grace from God, and God showed him grace and God showed him mercy. But then he comes out of the hospital alive and he goes back to his old ways, and him and his coven were still spiritually attacking me, still trying to sacrifice me to the devil Baphomet so he could live longer. I had to die. I had to be sacrificed to the devil Baphomet so Pope Francis could live longer. So that's what went on there. But of course, the devil could not save Pope Francis in the end, because Pope Francis and his coven won't stop trying to sacrifice me to the devil. And as I said, God showed him mercy and God showed him grace in the hospital and let him come out alive. But when he still wouldn't stop, then God was like, okay, you know what? I just showed you grace. I just showed you mercy. I just let you out of the hospital alive. I just let you live. And then you turn around and you do the same thing. You repeat the same thing. You go back to your old ways and you're still trying to sacrifice her, meaning me, to the devil. So that's where, as I said, Anubis came in. Anubis works with God, and Anubis is part of my spirit protection team. And Anubis is the Egyptian god of the dead and death and the afterlife. So that's when God called on Anubis and gave Anubis the green light to do his job with Pope Francis, because Anubis is also the Grim Reaper. So it was time for Pope Francis to go. He was shown mercy and grace as he asked for it, but when he still will not stop trying to sacrifice me to the devil Baphomet, then that was it. God was like, okay, well then, this is it. Your time is up. You have to go. You cannot live any longer as you wish. I showed you mercy, I showed you grace, and then you turn around and you go back to your old ways, and you still try and sacrifice her, meaning me, to the devil. After I showed you grace, after I showed you mercy, after I let you live. Okay, well then, your time is up. You cannot live any longer. You have to go now. And Anubis came in as the Grim Reaper, and Anubis did what Anubis had to do. Anubis did his job as the Grim Reaper. And Pope Francis finally died after coming out of the hospital alive. After a few weeks of coming out of the hospital alive. So that's what went on behind the scenes. And this is the spiritual side of things that people are not aware of, because they cannot see it. And they just don't know about it. And they just don't know about all of this. Only someone like me would know, a real prophet and a real messenger of God. And that's what happened there. And that's why Pope Francis is finally dead. And actually, after his death, his spirit has been coming through to me and asking me for forgiveness. And I'm not going to say any more on that. But I'm going to insert an old video here where I was channeling some information on what happened to Joan of Arc and how Pope Francis was involved, and how it was Pope Francis in that past life who was behind Joan of Arc burning alive at the stake. And he was behind it in that past life, where I was incarnated as Joan of Arc, and he was incarnated as a bishop, or he was a bishop in that past life. And he was behind having Joan of Arc burned alive at the stake. And in that short video that I'm just gonna insert here for you to watch, I was channeling my soul and I was channeling God, and they were letting me know about all of this, and giving me the information that I needed from my own Akashic records from that past life where I was incarnated as Joan of Arc, and Pope Francis was incarnated as well, and he was a bishop in that lifetime, and he was behind having Joan of Arc burned alive at the stake. So he was behind, Pope Francis was behind having me, or having my soul, burned alive at the stake in that past life where I was, or my soul was incarnated as Joan of Arc. So I'm going to be inserting that video here, and after that there's a 25 minutes documentary that I came across on Joan of Arc here on YouTube. So after this short video, there's a 25 minutes documentary on Joan of Arc, and I'll be inserting that video in here for people to watch as well, so we can refresh our memory regarding Joan of Arc and what happened to her in that past life, or in that lifetime. And now I'm being asked to deliver a message to Pope Francis, because he's watching me too, he's watching us too. I'm getting yes, he is. And I'm getting Pope Francis has been involved in having me spiritually attacked through black magic, witchcraft, sorcery, and negative dark spirits and demons and devils and his human minions for the last 2 years, because he's threatened by my presence, because he's not of God, but I am. And this is a message, although I've already given him a message in one of my recent previous videos, but this is another message coming through from God, from Archangel Michael, from the Arcturians. I'm getting Commander Ashtar as well, because he's always around me too, just watching over me, and I'm under his protection as well. But God, Archangel Michael is coming through here as well. God is coming through here. Archangel Michael is coming through here. The Arcturians are coming through here. Commander Ashtar is coming through here. Krishna for Hindus, Prophet Muhammad for Muslims, and of course, for Pope Francis, he is Matthew from the Bible, or Prophet Matthew is coming through here as well with this message. And also for Pope Francis, I am the reincarnation of Joan of Arc, whom you burnt. At the stake. I'm getting you were involved in burning Joan of Arc in that lifetime. What? Wow. Why? Because how? Because he was incarnated in that lifetime too, and now he's incarnated in this lifetime too. Yes, I'm getting a yes. Why am I getting a bishop? Because of course there was a bishop from the Catholic Church who was involved in having Joan of Arc burned at the stake. So Judgment Day is here for you. Wow. Right. So that's about past lives. And that's about a past life of my soul, who is also the reincarnation of Joan of Arc for Christians and Jews. But coming back to this lifetime, now I'm going to repeat the same message that I've already said in one of my previous videos recently, because they're asking me to repeat the same message here to you, Pope Francis. And the message is, and this message is coming from God, Archangel Michael in particular, because Archangel Michael is an angel of protection assigned by God on my behalf to deal with you, because you are still spiritually attacking me, and you're doing this to me in this lifetime again. This is the thing. This has been going on for lifetimes. The message coming from God, Archangel Michael, and the Arcturians, and Matthew from the Bible, Prophet Matthew, for you, Pope Francis, and of course, Joan of Arc, for you, Pope Francis, whom you burnt at the stake in my past life, where I was incarnated as Joan of Arc. And now this lifetime again, you're having me spiritually attacked for at least the last 2 years. And you are still at it, despite the warnings that I've been giving you and we've been giving you here on my channel. And despite the fact that we keep telling you that you are already under judgment, that you're already under God's judgment for that past life and what you did to me in that past life where I was Joan of Arc, and also now this lifetime again, here and now again. And you're still having me spiritually attacked, trying to have me sacrificed to the devil, Baphomet. Again? Because that's what it was in that past life where I was Joan of Arc too? Yes? Wow. And you're trying to sacrifice me to the devil, Baphomet, to the biggest devil here on planet Earth, Baphomet, again this lifetime too. And you're having me spiritually attacked constantly for the last 2 years. And you are the top person who is sitting above all of this. You're the top person involved here. So the message coming from God, Archangel Michael, and the Arcturians is the same as I've already said so in one of my previous videos recently, but I am being asked to repeat that message to you again. And the message is, the more you will attack me, the more losses you will incur. Because it's Judgment Day for you too. This lifetime, Pope Francis. And I also said this in that previous video as well, but I'm going to repeat myself here again with that too. Pope Benedict VII has been around me in spirit, and he's the one in charge of your judgment. He's been assigned. Pope Benedict VII has been assigned to handle and to take care of your judgment on my behalf. And I'm being told about Pope Benedict VII that he was a reformer too. So he was actually a good guy. He was actually a good pope. Pope Benedict VII. And now I'm getting him. So he's around me in spirit again right now. Okay. And that's enough for this message. I'm being asked to close this message now. Over and out.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Royalty Now, where we bring you face to face with figures from the past. Joan of Arc is an almost mythical figure. She's become a symbol of French freedom, leading men into battle and crowning kings, all before the age of 20. After we talk about her history, we'll get you closer to Joan of Arc than ever before by revealing our recreations of what she may have looked like. So let's go ahead and get started. Joan of Arc was born around 1412 in what is now Domremy, France, to her mother, Isabelle Romée, and her father, Jacques d'Arc. Her father was a landowning farmer and village official, and her mother was responsible for her family's education. Isabelle would teach her children about bravery and deep piety. It's said that her mother's last name, Romée, had been earned by taking a long pilgrimage on foot from France to Rome and the Vatican City. This dedication would be passed on to Joan, and from a very early age, she was passionately religious, and her faith would only grow as she got older. Now, to call France in the early 15th century an unstable place to live would be a massive understatement. At the time of Joan's birth, war had been raging in Europe for almost a century. There was not anyone alive that had known a time of peace. What is now called the 100 Years' War began in 1337, when the English king, Edward III, illegitimately laid claim to his uncle Charles IV's French throne and named himself the King of France. The ensuing war would go on to devastate France and began a dreadful period in human history. Edward III would invade and burn everything in his path, with hired mercenaries killing, stealing, and attacking women in every village they invaded. But the true horror hit Europe in 1347, when the Black Death, caused by bacteria that spread through fleas, began to ravage major cities indiscriminately. By the end of 1353, the Black Death would become the most fatal pandemic in human history, killing almost half of Europe's population. The area in which Joan was born still encountered deadly outbreaks every few decades. The following years would see the 100 Years' War continue to rage intermittently, with England striking blow after blow to the French. The misery of this conflict began to sow deep division within the French, with some wanting desperately to end the war, and some wanting desperately to get revenge on the English. These divisions would deepen for the rest of the 14th century. And in 1415, the English King Henry V took advantage of the situation, seeing a chance to end the war once and for all. He would invade France, hoping to conquer it entirely. Only a few months later, on October 15, 1415, at the Battle of Agincourt, the French suffered a catastrophic defeat. According to one historian, the French death roll read like a roll call of military and political leaders, and led to entire families of nobility being wiped out. This battle would lead the French king, Charles VI, to suffer a mental collapse. His queen, Isabel of Bavaria, and his uncle, John the Fearless, knew a deal had to be struck. On the 21st of May, 1420, they signed the Treaty of Troyes with the English king. The treaty disinherited the son of Charles VI, and instead promised to join dynasties with the English king, in hopes of finally ending the 100 Years' War. For those that were able to live through this harrowing period of war and plague, death had become such a common thing and happened to so many people around them that just being alive and being able to have a family was a blessing in itself. Somehow, the town of Domremy, where Joan lived, had remained relatively peaceful during the decades of the war, tucked away on the eastern border of France. But in 1425, England invaded Domremy and took its castle. Joan was just 13 at the time, and she was terrified of what the English and their mercenaries would do to her. She had heard story after story of their cruelty. She ran into her garden in fear and heard the church bells ringing. It was at this moment that her life changed forever. She would later testify in court that when those church bells rang that day, an angel, who she recognized as Saint Michael, appeared in her garden in all his awesome glory. According to Joan, Saint Michael, seen as a defender of Domremy, made Joan swear to remain a virgin and defend France. Still just a young girl, scared for her life, she pleaded to the angel to take her with him. She felt she could no longer bear the burden of the war that had ravaged her country for so long. When Saint Michael disappeared without her, she wept bitterly. But then, she remembered that when she was a child, a prophecy had spread around France that an armed virgin carrying the banner of France had been foretold to end their country's suffering. It was here that Joan the child became Joan the maiden, and she was determined to keep her vow. By 1428, most of northern and parts of southwest France had fallen to the English conquest, including Paris, and most notably the city of Reims, where French kings were traditionally crowned. In July of that same year, the English began to march on Orléans, which was essentially their final obstacle. Its location was at a strategic choke point, the gateway to central France. If Orléans fell, the English would have free rein to assault the rest of Charles VI's territory. The siege of Orléans would begin on the 12th of October, and everyone involved knew the stakes. Now, many in France, including Joan, still firmly believed that Charles, the Dauphin of France, should be their next king. This is the son of the Mad King who had been disinherited by the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. Joan was still in Domremy and had been trying to continue her normal life since her first vision in 1425. Over the next 3 years, she continued to hear voices intermittently, which told her she was destined to save France, but they hadn't given her any specific instructions. However, in 1428, her visions turned into explicit instructions, telling Joan she must leave her village immediately and find the Dauphin, the rightful heir to France. Guided by these visions, Joan and her uncle would travel to Vaucouleurs, the location of a French garrison. It was here that a 17-year-old girl claiming religious visions stood in front of the French soldiers and requested an armed escort to the Armagnac court, where the Dauphin was currently gathering support. She was essentially laughed out of the room. Joan would be sent back to Domremy. She had no real plan for how to convince the people in power to help her help them. However, her faith wasn't shaken. The visions had told her that she would see Charles crowned, and she believed them earnestly. Not long after she arrived back home, her village was once again raided by Anglo-Burgundian forces. Crops were destroyed and the soldiers had set fire to the town. In the wake of the destruction, Joan and her family were forced to flee to survive. Returning to Vaucouleurs, Joan was adamant, telling them that she was the savior of France and demanding to be taken to the Dauphin. Once again, she was refused, but this time, something about her determination struck the soldiers and some of the French noblemen. They could tell that she wholeheartedly believed what she was telling them, and they grew to believe her as well. In February of 1429, the garrison commander Robert de Baudricourt, hearing of Joan's growing support, finally agreed to meet with her. No one knows what she said to him during this meeting, but it only took this one conversation for him to be convinced. He immediately sent Joan with an escort of 6 soldiers to the Armagnac court in Chinon. According to legend, when she arrived in Chinon, the Dauphin was hidden amongst his men for security. Joan, who had never seen him before, walked directly up to him, bent down on one knee, and pledged allegiance to her rightful king. Joan would tell Charles that God recognized him as the true king, and that she was here to lead him to victory and crown him King Charles VII. This meeting naturally left a huge impression on Charles, but he wanted to be sure that she was the savior that she claimed to be. He wanted Joan to prove that she was sent by God. Joan simply replied, "It will be given if you send me to Orleans." Charles would commission a plate of armor made specially for Joan, and did just as she requested. On April 29, 1429, Joan arrived in Orleans. The story of the armed virgin, claiming to be the savior of France, had already spread far and wide. And when Joan entered the city, she was greeted by cheering crowds. But she wasn't just a figurehead raising morale. She was also determined to win the soldiers' respect. Wherever the fighting was the worst, Joan was there, on the front lines, fighting with them. Even the commanders began to listen to her, letting her give them advice on when and where to attack. Remember, this is a young woman who had been raised to spin cloth, tend sheep, and attend mass. She had no combat experience, but she had an unshakable belief in a unified France. On May 4th, the Armagnac army decided to go on the offensive, attacking the English forces head-on. Like many times before, the English army simply began to drive them back. A retreat was called, and the French were on the verge of yet another loss. But just as this retreat began, there was Joan the Maiden, sword in hand. The sight of her reminded them that God was on their side. The French turned around and attacked again, and this time they succeeded. The very next day, Joan sent the English a letter warning them to leave France immediately. The English refused to listen, but the Armagnacs had hope that they hadn't felt in years. They were so inspired by their recent victory that they attacked yet again, with Joan by their side. And it finally started a much-needed winning streak. On May 6th, the French captured the town of Saint-Jean-le-Blanc, and Joan convinced them to just keep on going. The very next day, they marched on Les Tourelles, the main English stronghold. Joan was feeling unstoppable. Holding her banner up high, she watched as the French forces overran the stronghold and saw the English beginning to retreat. But at that very moment, she was shot in the neck. An arrow in the neck was almost always a fatal injury. But not for Joan. She stayed on the battlefield to watch the French achieve their victory. And miraculously, the arrow that she had taken in the neck turned out only to be a minor wound. "Send me to Orleans and proof of my claim will be given." On May 8th, the siege of Orleans was abandoned by the English, only 9 days after Joan had arrived. France was saved. The sign was undeniable, and Joan had proven herself to everyone. Over the next 2 months, Joan's confidence in her mission and aggressive attitude towards the English would inspire France's forces to victory after victory. On July 16, 1429, Reims opened its gates to the French forces led by Joan. The very next morning, Joan stood next to the Dauphin and watched as Charles was crowned King of France. Joan the Maiden, impossible as it may have seemed, had actually fulfilled a promise that she had made to God. During her mission, she had transformed herself from a girl in a small village to one of the most influential and inspirational people in France. Now, she was determined to defeat the English outright and free her country from their threat once and for all. The Armagnac army would take 2 weeks to celebrate Charles' coronation, but then they began their march across France once again. As they marched, they were, almost suspiciously, met with nearly zero opposition from either the English or the French faction allied with them, called the Burgundians. In September, Joan's forces arrived in Paris and began their assault, expecting an easy victory. But this time, the enemy was ready. Right from the start, things began to go wrong. Early in the battle, Joan was shot in the leg and trapped in a trench near the city walls. Still, she refused to be taken off the front lines, staying with the men who were still fighting for their lives. By the end of the day, 1,500 Armagnacs had died, to no avail. The next morning, Charles would call off the attack, to the outrage of Joan. Now, many of the people in Charles' court were beginning to see Joan as a liability. Although she had become very popular, she was seen as too aggressive, too independent, and too selfish to be trusted. Although he was hesitant at first, Charles slowly began to see that her influence was getting in the way of peace with England and the Burgundians. But he still recognized that Joan had been an inspiration to his troops and was a major reason why he had taken back his crown from the English in the first place. As a thank you, Charles would raise Joan and her family to French nobility. But after this, it became evident that the French court no longer had need for her. Charles VII began peace talks with the Burgundians and agreed on a truce that would last until Easter of 1430. Joan was noticeably absent from the negotiations. She was convinced that only aggression against the Burgundians would keep the English at bay, and on May 23, 1430, she attacked a Burgundian camp outside of a city called Compiègne. But her forces were overwhelmed in an ambush, and she was captured. Although allied with the English, the Burgundians knew how valuable Joan was as a hostage, and they would only release her to the English for the steep ransom of 10,000 livres. Knowing that Joan had become an unstoppable figurehead for the Armagnacs, the source of all of their hope, the English were happy to pay the price. Joan was transferred into English custody in November of 1430. The English knew that they had to get rid of her, but they needed charges, so they began interrogations for heresy and essentially witchcraft. Over the course of many weeks of questioning, Joan admitted to hearing voices, but she was steadfast, saying they came from God, the same God that the English worshipped, and not the devil. She was also accused of wearing men's clothing, which was considered against the natural order set by God. At her trial, Joan had to respond to over 70 charges against her. It was, of course, not a fair proceeding. Nearly all of those responsible for her verdict were pro-English or pro-Burgundian. Facing the threat of immediate execution by burning, the terrified Joan signed an abjuration, essentially admitting to her supposed crimes. She would henceforth be banned from wearing men's clothes or bearing arms ever again, and would remain in prison. If she were ever found to have relapsed as a heretic, her punishment would be severe. She was returned to prison and kept in horrible conditions. But most of all, Joan was racked by guilt. She had renounced the one thing that she believed in: her visions from God. Over the next 7 days, she regained her courage, and once again donning male attire, she withdrew her confession. On May 30th, 1431, Joan was told that she faced a heretic's execution. She was taken to the public square and publicly read her sentence of condemnation. Before her hands were tied up, she pleaded for a cross to hold. An English soldier, moved by her words, quickly handed her a small wooden crucifix. In her final moments, Joan, aged only 19, kissed the cross and placed it on her chest. Although she was not alive to see it, Joan of Arc undoubtedly changed France's fate in the 100 Years' War. The English would never again regain their momentum. And in 1453, the French finally expelled the English, with a victory at the Battle of Castillon, fulfilling Joan's promise of a unified France. Nearly 20 years after her death, Charles VII ordered an inquiry into the trial of Joan of Arc, and at a restoration trial, her guilty verdict was overturned. Joan has gone on to become a powerful symbol for unity in France. In 1920, she was canonized as a saint and has inspired millions of women with her confidence and self-belief. Joan's life is a true testament that we are all created equal and can all rise to the greatness within us. So let's talk about Joan's appearance and reveal our recreations. What Joan really looked like is almost entirely a mystery. In fact, this doodle in the margins of French parliamentary notes is the only image that exists from her lifetime, and was sketched by someone who had not even seen her in person. There is also this statue head from a church in Orléans. The statue dates to the 15th century, and given Joan's association with the city and the feminine appearance, this led historians to believe this might be a depiction of her, or perhaps the image of a saint using Joan herself as a model. However, in more recent years, this has been nearly debunked, and it's now believed to belong to a full statue of St. George. The statue head was clearly an influence for this full-length statue of Joan of Arc in the Rheims Cathedral, created in 1910. So this kind of template is still strongly associated with her appearance. Luckily, we do have quite a few physical descriptions to guide us with a possible reconstruction. We know that she was short, probably around 5'2", and very muscular with a strong, thick neck. Multiple accounts say she had really dark hair, and she cropped it short with bangs, similar to the men's hairstyles at the time. Her eyes were described as large, dark, and grave, and matched her skin tone, which was tan and usually sunburned from her time outdoors. She also had a small red birthmark visible behind one of her ears. In 1844, a letter was discovered, written by Joan in 1429. Within the wax seal was a single black hair, pressed in by the tip of a finger. It is believed that this may have been the fingerprint and hair of Joan herself, stemming from a custom where a letter writer would pluck a hair from their head to guarantee authenticity. The letter still remains, but sadly the seal has since been lost. Percival de Boulainvilliers wrote a long account about Joan to his king Charles VII. He said, "The maid is of satisfying grace, and in her conversation displays wondrous good sense. Her voice has a womanly charm. She eats little and delights in beautiful horses and armor, and greatly admires armed and noble men. She sheds tears freely, her expression is cheerful, and she has a great capacity for work. Of such endurance is her handling and bearing of arms that she remained for 6 days and nights in full armor." So in terms of the recreation, this is mostly an artistic depiction, but I've used contemporary descriptions of Joan, as well as some influence from the statue head, to bring you what she might have looked like. So let's take a look at Joan of Arc now. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all for the next video.